One of the most obvious ways to enhance your rifle's capability is by adding thermal. Thermal imaging is becoming synonymous with any type of near-peer conflict scenario and has a lot of other uses as well. But when it comes to a fighting rifle setup, having thermal can make a huge difference in the sense of what you're capable of depending on the environment you find yourself in. And one of my favorite ways to add thermal is in the clip-on configuration, where you can keep your rifle set up the way you would want in a daytime normal scenario and then add thermal as needed, rather than relying on thermal being your primary aiming option. So this video, we're gonna go over a very good clip-on device that's at more of an entry-level price point. This is the ATN Tico LTV 320, and it has been very good for me, and it might be the best clip-on at its price point to add to an ACOG setup, which I love ACOG, hopefully you love ACOG, and if you're ACOG gang, hit the subscribe button down below because I know you're good people. Now, we're gonna go through the technical specs of this particular clip-on, and I'm also gonna give you some use case scenarios for it in the sense of why I think this might be the right thing to do for the prepared citizen, rather than going to a dedicated thermal setup or not having it at all. And one thing I've learned through the process of using this particular optic is that a dedicated clip-on has some benefits over something else that can be a clip-on if needed. And that's something I've learned by using this, which might give you something to think about. Now, full disclosure, Midway USA sent the ATN Tico LTV 320 to the channel because they're good friends of mine, and I really appreciate all their support throughout the years. So thank you to the Midway USA team. There'll be a link in the pinned comment as well as in the description that'll take you to my website where you can get the ATN Tico LTV 320 through an affiliate link, and that would be greatly appreciated because it does support the channel. Now, this setup right here that you're looking at, just so we're all on the same page, is kind of the best I could do. Like, this is the rifle. I don't know how else to say it. This setup is done, which is something I haven't been able to say pretty much ever. But I have zero intention on doing anything else to this rifle besides shooting it. So the ATN Tico LTV 320 really completed this package to the point where I'm done now. And that is something that you have to hold me to, because in a month when I change something on here, I want you to make fun of me and lambaste me. Regardless of that, let's talk about the actual thermal itself, okay? Like I said more than once now, the ATN Tico LTV 320 is the model of this particular thermal, and they also have a higher end version as well. This has the 320 by 240 resolution. You can also get the 640 by 480 resolution, but it costs about twice as much. And speaking of cost, right now you can find these through that link I mentioned earlier for about $1,300, which is really good in the sense of what it provides capability-wise, but it's not always at that price point, so keep that in mind. It can fluctuate. MSRP is about $2K. So here's what I really like about this particular thing in the sense of use case scenario. It's a clip-on, and that's the only way I'm using it. Why? Because I think once you start doing other things with it, you take away the simplicity aspect of it and start to ask for more than what it's capable of. So what is it capable of? Well, it has a 60 Hertz thermal sensor, which gives it about a 1,040 meter detection range. Now, according to ATN's actual literature, it could get up to 2,000 meters, but the 1,040 mark is definitely acquirable. It is very effective. Those deer right now are at, from here, about 500 yards. So you can see it's very easy to pick them up and obviously tell that there's movement out there, and you can also tell that these are four-legged creatures. So very clear for being the 320 model over the 640 model. That's something that you should be aware of. It uses an OLED 1024 by 768 display. So it's a very clear, very easy to see display that works quite well. I want to take a second to thank SDI, the Sonoran Desert Institute, for supporting the channel. Now, I know what you're thinking, but if you want to learn gunsmithing or how to work with drones and become a better asset to your community without having to relocate or travel to a facility, SDI can provide you with that education. And it's an accredited college, so at the end, you could come out with a degree. And whatever you do with that education thereafter is up to you. And of course, they're updating their programs and supplying additional equipment and tools, so the education you get will be valuable. So check out sdi.edu/magic to get additional information. There will be links in the description as well as in the pinned comment, and I thank SDI for their support. The battery it uses is an 18650 rechargeable, which provides you with an 8-hour battery life. So of course you could carry some extra 18650s with you, and you can also recharge the one that comes with this particular thermal because they provide the charger in the box, which I find to be very beneficial. All right, I just wanted to go over some of the details of the Tico LTV and just kind of let you see it up close. So on top here, we obviously have the buttons, which we have a power button, and then we have our 2 cycling buttons, and then this is like the menu button, or I would say like the enter button. But obviously, these give you a couple of functions on their own. They let you adjust the brightness and the contrast and things of that nature, as well as holding this one down is what allows you to switch through the color palettes. And then holding this down opens the menu. And then, like I said, you cycle through it with the 2 arrows, and then you use it like an enter button. So very simple layout, very easy to feel these raised embossed shapes, so that way when you're trying to use it at night and you don't necessarily need to look at it, you can go ahead and just feel it and you know exactly where you are. So I do like that quite a bit about it. And the power button itself is actually recessed, so it's like flush to the actual unit, so it's harder to activate or deactivate, so that way you're doing everything intentionally. So I think that's good. It comes with this little rubber cap here for the sensor. Totally fine, works the way it's supposed to, but it's kind of annoying because it flops around a little bit, but obviously you could replace it. But I just kind of strap mine down with a bungee, and it seems to work without being a big issue, but then allows me to maintain a level of protection if needed. So this is the actual focus ring, which is over here on the objective side of the optic, and you can just, spin it to focus, and there's like a very defined spot that, like, once you get there, you know you're there. So that works perfectly fine. It's very easy to use. And then this is actually just a shroud that comes with the optic, which allows you to encompass an optic, like a secondary optic, a scope, or in my case, an ACOG, a little bit better in blocking out some of that extra light. And then it's just threaded on. So you would just unscrew this if you decide you didn't want to use it. And then this is where you would attach those other adapters that are available. If I can hurry up and take this off, you can see that it's threaded right there. So this works very well for what I use it for, and I don't feel the need to get those other adapters, but this is how you would attach those if you decide you need them. Now, on the bottom here, let me put that back on, we have our mount. Now, this is actually a Midwest Industries mount, so I thought that was kind of cool because they make good stuff, and it's been a very good mount. And obviously, it's quick detached, so you have your lever system here, which just allows you to loosen it, and then once you put it on the rail, tighten it down, you're good to go. And with these Midwest Industries mounts, one thing you want to be aware of is that you're going to tighten it by actuating this little bolt right here on the side. You just push in on the spring portion like so, and you can see that the bolt head pops up, so that way you can spin it left or right, depending on if you need to tighten or loosen it, and find the optimal position. And what you're looking for with this particular mount, and a lot of the newer Midwest Industries mounts in general, is where you get a locking click, kind of like a very tight and solidified audible attachment noise when you do actually lock it in on the rail. And in fact, all those words mean nothing. I'll just show you how that works really quick. All right, so unlike other QD mounts, this one, you're going to tighten it down right to the point where it gets this audible snap when it locks into place. And that's how you know it's actually very well secured. So we'll go ahead and throw it on here. And I put mine just so it's on the handguard, and I don't bridge the handguard and the receiver. I could push it back further, which would envelope the ACOG a little bit better when I have the shroud on, but then it's bridged between the receiver and the handguard, and I just don't personally like that because it could cause some issues when it comes to overall fragility of the system. So this is better, and I haven't had issues with my BCM handguard losing 0 or anything like that, so no problem. So listen while I actually lock this QD in, because you'll understand what I mean by just hearing that audible click. So once you get that click, it's rock solid. So it's a little different than some of the other quick detach mounts I've used in the past. I just wanted to demonstrate that because it is something that you have to be aware of. Okay, so back to just a Tico. Now, other than the mount, we also have the battery compartment right here, which obviously tells you which way the positive and the negative end goes. And then this is kind of on a little bit of spring tension. Kind of see how it kind of pops out there. Of course, this cover fell off once again. And then your battery here is the rechargeable 18650 that comes with it. So that's been good to go. I'm definitely going to charge this one up. But battery compartment, it's nice. It's tethered, so you don't have to worry about the cap being lost or anything like that. And it does have a little bit of spring to it. So when you're putting the battery back in, you're going to have to put some pressure on it in order to tighten it down. But once it's nice and tight, it's very secure. So that's the unit close up. And then we'll go ahead and open the box here just so you can kind of see what it comes with and what to expect. So it says the country of origin is the USA, and that's pretty awesome. I'm not sure exactly how that verbiage all works, but I think we're in a good spot if that's where we're headed when it comes to this thermal equipment, especially at these price points. Go ahead and take out the sleeve. And like I said, they do show that there's those other mounting adapters here in case you want to use it for, other purposes. There's some of the literature there based on the specifications, all that usual stuff. Here's the box. It's magnetized, which is nice. And then in here, you can see the optic came like so. The shroud was over here in this pocket. There's a little cap here that was covering the sensor. It's actually exactly what you would expect. And of course, you get some other stuff here in the boxes. There's like a little soft case, a neoprene case that it comes with, which I don't necessarily use, but it does have that. And then there's also some other stuff in here, like a battery charger. Now, it's not in here right now because I've been using it, but it does come with the battery charger for the battery. And so that's nice and beneficial because now you can keep this thing up and running, right? So that's what to expect. You pick one of these up when it comes to what's in the box, what it comes with, what the unit looks like up close, and what it has in the sense of, mounting as well as the shroud. So let's get back to what we do with it. Let's talk about why this setup is so well balanced. This particular thermal weighs 19 ounces with the QD mount. Now, 19 ounces ain't bad. I mean, it's sitting right around the same weight as the actual combat optic you see here itself. So you're doubling your optics package weight when you set it up with an ACOG like this one, which we'll get into that a little bit more here soon, but this with an ACOG is like where it's at. But regardless, okay? 19 ounces with the QD mount that it comes with. It also provides a riser in case you have to meet your optic height a little bit higher, but I didn't use the riser and everything lined up perfectly with the standard factory Trijicon ACOG mount, so something else for you to consider when it comes to that. One of the coolest things about this particular thermal clip-on is that it is calibrated from the factory to not need any zeroing, and it has unlimited eye relief. So you could set it all the way down your handguard if you wanted, all the way back on your receiver if you wanted. Here's the thing, there was no zeroing required. I slapped this on the rifle, started shooting at targets, and I was hitting the targets no problem. And so that was really impressive because I didn't expect that. Now there are some settings you can mess with where you can fix that in case there is any, misalignment issues, but the fact that I was able to slap it on the gun and then just start shooting and hit the targets I meant to hit was something that I found to be very beneficial because it takes a lot of the guesswork out and makes it a lot easier for anybody who just wants to have this capability but doesn't want to have to get too complicated with it. So another thing is that it does have some adapters you can acquire, but they're not included with it. So it does have an eyepiece monocular adapter, and that adapter, I think it gives it like a 2.5x magnification because the way this works, because it's a clip-on meant to be in front of a magnified optic, is that the screen is kind of like zoomed out away from you if you were just to look at it the way it is right now. And then you need your magnified optic to kind of bring it closer once again, so that way you're fully zoomed in basically. And so that that monocular eyepiece has to have some magnification in order to give you that full image you'd be looking for. Now, I don't necessarily find the need for that because that's not what I'm going to be using this for in general. But if I needed to use it as a monocular in a pinch, even without the eyepiece, I could to at least detect things. It would just be a little bit less comfortable and not as easy to see, but it would still be usable in that setup. But that's not what I have this for, and that's not really what I care about when it comes to it. It does cost a lot to get these adapters, by the way. The monocular one is, they're both like over 100, by the way. So the scope mounting clip-on adapter might be something you would actually want though. Depending on the optics package you're using and how you intend to use this setup as a whole, if you were using like more of a traditional like MPVO or something along those lines, it would be potentially beneficial to get the scope mounting adapter so that way it could go right on the objective lens and you get the best possible picture and you don't have to worry about the alignment of different mount heights and everything else. So those things are available, but they're just not with the optic in the box, okay? Let's talk about why it's so good with an ACOG, okay? One of the things with the ACOG when it comes to other thermals I've used in the past is that it's at 4x magnification. So sometimes that can be a little too much. It makes the menu screens disappear. It makes a lot of things not work quite the way you would like it to. And it can also over pixelate at times depending on how everything is calibrated. But for this particular thermal clip-on, it's almost like it was made for an ACOG. It just works really well in this configuration. The image is still very clear. Like I said, I didn't have to zero it or anything like that. And the fact that it puts it in this small package is what I really like about it. It brings the weight back on the rifle, which makes it very balanced. Like I said, this is 19 ounces with the mount. Then we have this optics package right here, which is right around that same weight. And so bringing it all to the back of the receiver allows everything to maintain a level of balance that you wouldn't have with like an LPVO or a more traditional rifle scope, because then this particular thermal clip-on would either have to be really far forward on the handguard, which moves a lot more weight down towards the end of the barrel, which is where we don't want it, or it would be hanging off the end of that scope, adding that additional weight further front once again. So with this particular optics package, it really balances well, and it ends up not feeling like you have a lot of extra weight on the gun, even though it is an additional 19 ounces. That's one of the things that I really like about it. This setup with an ACOG, like this might be, at least for the entry-level price point that this particular thermal clip-on is at, the best ACOG clip-on you can get for that price point for these reasons, okay? At least so far. I do know there are higher end, better quality thermal clip-ons out there that would work better with an ACOG than this does, but some of those can get up to like 7K. So it's all depending on what you're willing to invest in. And at that point, I mean, you might even be willing to have something better than even what an ACOG can do, right? So these are all things that we have to figure out in the sense of balance and compromise and everything else. But for this particular use case with this particular optic, it does very, very well, which I found to be impressive. Now, enhances your capabilities like 10x, let's be honest. Having the ability to use thermal imaging on your rifle setup without having to zero it or anything else is a game changer for any type of a situation that might arise where bad people are coming for you, right? And so this allows you that enhanced ability without having to do a lot of guesswork or anything like that. And I think at this point in time, especially with what we see with conflict going on overseas and everything else, having thermal in your kit is somewhat of a necessity. In fact, personally, and this is just what I've said in the past more than once, but I would prioritize getting something like this thermal over anything related to like NVGs or something like that, just because of what it brings to the table and the level of, let's just say, accessibility regarding price point comparatively. So now, I haven't had any issues with this in weather. And so I've used it in rain, I've used it in snow, I've used it in the cold, and it hasn't given me any problems. So I think that's also very indicative of a higher level of quality. So what does it have in the sense of features? Let's go through that. I'll show you through the screen and everything else so you can see as I go through the menu options and all of the different calibrations and the color palettes and all that kind of stuff, because you do have a full range of adjustments with this particular thermal, and it does all the things you need and nothing you don't. All right, right now we're on White Hot, which is my favorite of the color palettes, but we'll go through all of them so you can see them. Here we have Black Hot. This is Red Hot, Red Cold, Green Hot, Green Cold, Rainbow, and Inverted Rainbow. So cycling through those is very easy, as you can tell. And then we'll go ahead and show you that you can adjust a lot of stuff on here too if needed, although I find keeping it simple to be maybe the easier way, which is probably why I like White Hot the best. But you can easily adjust things like your contrast, which I keep on medium generally. You can adjust things like your brightness, which depending on the lighting conditions, you might want to go down to 1, which right here actually looks a little bit better. And then you can also contrast, or not contrast, but change things like exposure and saturation and just everything else that you might want to fix in order to make the image as clear as possible. So we just jumped back into changing the color palettes again, just to kind of go through those one more time for you. You can see that the battery indicator is up there in the left corner of the screen. That is something you can actually move, which I'll show you right here. So we'll actually go ahead, try to adjust this camera really quick. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go through the menu. So Here we have the menu. You can change the thermal directly with this if you'd like as well, including, like I said, the contrast. You can change the sensitivity too. Right now it's on medium, but you can actually make that high, especially if you're working on longer range targets. Go over here to Sharp IR. This is kind of like an image enhancer. I just leave it on high because I do think it makes things a little bit more clear. But you can change that from low, off, and high. The palettes are all listed right here. And so if you want to go through them in this order, you can. Like I said, white hot's where it's at. Pixel correction, you can do that automatically or manually. So that just makes sure everything is lined up better and gives you a clearer image. And then that's it for the thermal section. And on display is where you can actually change where things are located. So mono mode is where you go into monocular mode if you were to get that adapter. I'm not using that and I don't necessarily need it, so it's fine. Brightness, obviously you can change that. Items radius, okay? So this is where you can kind of change where things on the screen are. So you can see here the menu I have shrunk down to number 2, which allows you to see it, but not have it cover your image too much, okay? And then the status bar, which is where that little battery symbol is, you can change here using the X and Y axis. So with X, I can move it back and forth, and that way I can see it, but it doesn't occlude my image to whatever degree I want to remove it from that. So it has all those capabilities to really ensure everything is accessible, right? You also have your settings, where you can do standby mode. I leave it off because this is a good way to accidentally drain your batteries, at least in my opinion. But I do prefer the ability to turn this unit off quickly, which you can do by just hitting the power button once and it shuts off. But turning it back on does require you to hold the power button. And sometimes you hear a noise that kind of indicates that it's turning on, and other times not really. So standby mode is convenient, but it will drain your batteries if you're not careful with it. So that's one of the things that I have found and why I don't use it. The image adjustment is something you can change around if you want, but it does come from the factory with a certain level of settings involved in order to make it very plug and play. AKA you can, slap it on a rifle and not have to worry about zeroing or anything else like that. So I generally just leave this alone. And then, keeps wanting me to get out of the menu here. You can go into your factory settings and reset everything and do all those things as well. Not to mention the language. I believe we go in here really quick. This is just to restore them, exactly. All right, so go back. And my hands are just very cold right now because it's in North Dakota. And everything is just cold already at this point. And so you can also come down here and calibrate your zoom. And it just makes sure that everything is lined up the way you need it to be. Like I said, I generally leave these settings alone because I want to make sure that it remains in that plug and play configuration of just slapping it on the rifle and it already being zeroed. But it does give you that ability to calibrate it to whatever your needs might be. So I do think that's beneficial. But I think one of the best parts about the ATN Tico is that it is plug and play. So that's how the menu works. And as you can see, I have it set up to work pretty well within this configuration. Obviously, if you're using like a 1X LPVO or something like that, you might move the menu and the status bar and everything else around in order to fit that a little bit better. But here on the ACOG at 4X, everything fits in the window quite well. And we still get a very good image of those deer out there in the field, which, we turn on some illumination if you need it. Maybe that's too much illumination, right? But it does allow you to really get in on target while still being able to see everything. And this is one of those few instances where having some illumination on an optic can be very beneficial when you're in this white hot mode and it's harder to see that contrast of the black reticle and the crosshairs. So, all right, everybody, so that's the ATN Tico or TICO LTV 320. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below, especially at the price point that it's at. I think it's a pretty good value, not to mention the fact that it just works so good with an ACOG that if you're ACOG gang and you haven't really upgraded to something like having a thermal clip-on yet, this is not a bad one to check out because it does actually work in this configuration very well, which I was surprised by. And of course, if you think that it would be a good fit for you, make sure you check out that link in the description as well as in the pinned comment. Big thanks to Midway USA for helping out the channel and still being good friends, because honestly, all the guys over there have been awesome and I really appreciate all their support throughout the years. Anything else you need from me at all, you know what to do. Go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.